Okay.
before it actually starts.
Ooh, cool. All right.
Hi, everybody. I'm Carol Kauffman, the founder of the Institute of Coaching with the magnificent Amy Edmondson. And if I wouldn't make people feel psychologically unsafe, I would say, if you don't know Amy, you've been hiding under a rock. But because I know Amy, I know that's exactly the wrong thing to say. So one thing I want to remind you all of, this is Amy's most recent book, and it's out, and she's having lots of events. And she's also going to be speaking at the Institute of Coaching conference. Her title is Unlocking Growth Through Intelligent Failures, the Strategic Advantage of Embracing Fallibility. So, Amy, why don't you just launch off? And
that is a great title, Carol. Thank you for helping me with that. So, yeah, let me just dive right in. So, first of all, I can't help starting here. Fallibility. Oh, that's not much fun. The idea here is that we are all, like it or not, fallible human beings. That's a given. And that does not mean we cannot thrive and grow. In fact, quite the opposite. I think embracing that reality allows us both to do our part to prevent preventable failures and to embrace what I'll call intelligent failures. So in the book, I identify three archetypes, three types of failure. The first two are not so good. We want to avoid them. We want to prevent them, that is. And the third is one that we must learn to participate more often in and embrace. So basic failures. Basic failures are failures caused by a single factor, usually human error. We make a mistake in familiar territory, we get a failure. Those can be big, those can be small. Complex failures are the perfect storms. They're the failures that are caused not by one clear causal factor, but by a handful of usually sort of smallish deviations from best practices. And those small deviations, any one of them on its own would not have caused a failure. It's the unfortunate confluence of factors that led to the failure. Both basic failures and complex failures are preventable and worthy of trying to prevent, right? We, at our best, with vigilance, with training, with teamwork, with speaking up, we can catch and correct most of them. Now, the third type, the intelligent failures, those are the still undesired results of thoughtful forays into new territory, otherwise known as an experiment, a thoughtful experiment. And a failure is intelligent when it's in pursuit of a goal in new territory. We don't yet know how to get the result we want. We've done our homework. We've taken the time to think through what we believe might work. And finally, the failure or the risk is no bigger than necessary. It's just big enough to allow us to get the new information we're trying to get, and no bigger, not so big that we're wasting resources or potentially giving rise to serious reputational harm or human safety harm. So that's what makes a failure intelligent. And of course, fifth criterion: take the time to learn from it. So that's kind of the failure landscape, as it were. And thriving is really about embracing the third kind and doing everything you can to prevent the other two.
So 1 year, my New Year's resolution was, this year, I want to make new mistakes. I don't want to make my old mistakes. I want new ones. And it seems to me part of the way to prevent a lot of these mistakes is through your work in psychological safety.
Absolutely.
You want to just talk a little bit about that?
Yeah. So first, I want to say, I actually, in the book, I distinguish between mistakes and failures. Where a mistake is when we make a mistake, we know it's a mistake, right? We knew better. There was a recipe, and we made a mistake. We didn't use it or didn't use part of it. Whereas a failure can be caused by a mistake, or it can be caused by just the hypothesis was wrong. So instead of new mistakes, I think a better way, your New Year's resolution could be new failures, right?
New intelligent failures.
Exactly. And so now how do we do that? Well, so it's psychological safety comes into play in two ways. First of all, psychological safety plays a crucial role in helping us prevent complex failures. I mean, most of the complex failures I've studied, whether those are NASA shuttle disasters, or less well-known business failures, could have been prevented had people felt psychologically safe enough to speak up with their concerns in a timely way. Right? It's far more, occasionally complex failures come out of the blue. Nobody saw them coming, but it's far more typical that at least one sane person saw the worry, but didn't feel able to speak up. So creating the environment where people absolutely know, have confidence, their voice is welcome, is an important part of preventing preventable failures. It is also, psychological safety is also an important part of creating conditions where people are willing to take the risks of experimentation. I mean, by definition, an experiment is a risk, right? If you know in advance it's going to work, it's not an experiment. And so
that's a great point.
Having psychological safety to sort of be willing to do something that's on purpose, smart risk, you will be much more likely to do that in an organization if you have a sense of psychological safety.
Do you want to give us some examples from that, either pilots or nurses or Alan Mulally?
Well, gosh, which one would you like?
I don't know what people would like. Which one?
Well, okay. So one of the, I'll start with pilots, maybe because you said it first, but I interviewed an aviation safety expert and a longtime pilot named Ben Berman, who said he would start every cockpit crew briefing with a new crew as follows, and he would say, and I quote, "I've never flown a perfect flight, and it won't happen today either. I need to hear from you." Right. So that is what I call in the Fearless Organization a framing statement. I mean, he's essentially reframing, getting them on the same page. If their attitude coming in was A, he's the boss, B, it's a pretty routine flight to Chicago today, we got to change that, right? It's got to be, aviation is always a high risk endeavor where there's always variability. There's always things we didn't see coming. And I'm a fallible human being. I will make a mistake at some point, and I need to hear from you. So it's a statement intended to create permission for speaking up, which is otherwise known as psychological safety.
And one part, continuing with the pilot part, is maybe you could share some of that really interesting research about tired.
Oh yeah, I love that. Yeah, so that was work done by Clay Fouché back in the 80s. When they started getting really interested in, of course, the very important problem of trying to prevent any passenger air travel crashes, fatalities of any kind. And so some of this research, the research question was essentially, do better rested pilots make fewer errors? And you don't want to do an experiment in midair, right? So you do it in the simulator and give them all sorts of tough scenarios, unexpected scenarios, and see how they do. Well, to their surprise, they found, well, this wasn't surprising. This is what they expected, that the more fatigued pilots made the way they generated the two conditions. They didn't make you tired or something. They just said the fatigued pilots were the ones who had just spent like 3 or 4 days flying together in their crew, and the non-fatigued pilots were the ones who were coming fresh off of a break and were just go right into the simulator, not coming right off of duty. And so, as expected, the more fatigued pilots did make more mistakes, but absolutely unexpectedly, the fatigued teams did better, and their performance was better. So the individuals made mistakes, but the teams caught and corrected each other's mistakes simply because they just spent 3 or 4 days flying together. They knew each other, and that kind of that team stability that they'd created for just that short time allowed them to be better at teamwork. And so this was a kind of, this was really an eye-opening, this wasn't expected. This was an eye-opener. What they concluded was, wow, these team dynamics matter. And they started then studying the team dynamics. And as time went on, one of the big dynamics they observed was that the hierarchical difference in this, this sort of almost militaristic structure and history of aviation led people in the lower power position to be very, very reluctant to speak up to the pilot, to the boss. And they realized that is a very dangerous phenomenon. So they started to work hard at how do we normalize the act of speaking up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's great work. And it so ties into all your work with teaming. And one person requested you give an example of nurses.
Do you think they mean like a story or a study, do you think?
Let's go with a story if one is right there.
A story. I open Fearless Organization with the story of Christina. It's a disguised story. Who working in a NICU has a concern that the physician is not recommending a treatment that is normally used, and momentarily considers saying so, and then just as momentarily recalls the last time she sort of spoke up with input like that, and getting kind of chewed out, and brain immediately goes to, he's the doctor, I'm the, he probably knows what he's doing. There's probably, I'm 90% sure that there's something in this situation that I'm missing. So she stays silent. Now, all of that words that I used happen in a nanosecond, right? It's
right.
Our brains are fast processors. We process, but we're sort of processing the technical risk and the interpersonal risk simultaneously, and not rationally, right? Because rationally, it is obviously better to err on the side of speaking up. It's obviously better when one risk is merely interpersonal and the other risk is technical or, patient safety related. Obviously, you speak up, right? But that's not how the brain actually works, unless there's really pretty good leadership that has, as Ben Berman did, makes clear you are always to speak up. I will miss something. I need to hear from you, and a priori.
Well, really speaks to the danger of ego and creating ego-centric organizations rather than other-centric organizations.
Yes, and ego. I mean, we have ego. Everyone has ego, right? So it's in a way, I guess the way I think about it is it's not enough to say ego is a risk factor. We have to say, yep, ego is a risk factor. Now, what do we do about it? And we can't blame or other the people who have ego, because we're all the people who have ego, right? Instead, we have to say, ego's going to get in the way, or taken for granted mental models are going to get in the way, our fear is going to get in the way. So we then commit to working together, operating together in a special way, a way that won't feel natural, but that will be better.
Yeah. So one of the things you also talk about are 3 competencies for navigating failure. And I think everybody would love to hear about that, and very useful in our coaching.
Yeah. So the first half of the book is about the 3 kinds of failure, and the best practices for preventing the preventable ones, and the best practices for, embracing the necessity of experimentation in new territory, and so forth. And that is stuff I've been writing about, working on for a very long time. And finally sort of pulled it all together with stories. And then I realized, sort of over the last few years, I began to think more about what are the competencies. It's like the ego comment you just made. I mean, what do we have to do? What do we have to master if we're going to play a role in driving ego out and relationships and other orientation in? And the framework that I have been working with is self, situation, and system. And these are three competencies, 3 awarenesses, if you will. So self-awareness is kind of the starting point for greater self-awareness. with respect to failure, failure prevention, failure embracing is about choosing learning, actually choosing learning over knowing, because our brains will spontaneously pick knowing. Like we think we see reality, we think we're right. It's a kind of strong, robust tendency. I see the situation, and my view of the situation is the right view. I don't think about that consciously. It's just it's automatic. Self-awareness is the awareness to say, I see my view and it's surely incomplete. Right. So I'm curious. I wonder what Carol sees that I miss. So because of that curiosity, I'm now going to ask her, and I'm going to learn. So it's kind of the awareness to see yourself as a player in a larger story rather than as the player in the story, and to actively choose learning over knowing, to get less bogged down by and uncomfortable with our fallibility, but accepting the fallibility as part of the program, and working with it instead of sort of against it. Situation awareness is a little bit more technical, very obvious, but often not done. It says we need to become highly aware of the different situations we're in. And there's really two dimensions of a situation that I think are worth paying attention to. And one is, what are the stakes? Right? Is this a high stakes situation? And there's really three dimensions there. There's human safety. There's financial stakes. What's at stake here? And then there's reputational stakes. And those can be high and those can be low. And the other dimension is uncertainty. There's some situations where an assembly line where the degree of certainty is quite high, and then there are others, scientific laboratory, where the uncertainty is very, very high. And depending on where you are in that matrix of high and low uncertainty and high and low stakes, that dictates how much and what kinds of risks you're willing to take. It's where you practice terribly cautious action, like passenger air travel. We don't take crazy risks. We don't do experiments up in the air. We do them in the simulator because the stakes in the simulator are super, super low. And if you're in a laboratory and the whole point of it is to learn and push the envelope, you should have fun experimenting and learning, and not be tied up in knots about not wanting to fail. In fact, you should want to fail. So that's situation awareness. It's kind of size it up and then respond appropriately.
Before we go into systems, which is one of my favorite topics, I wanted to share a couple of questions. One is from Tammy Turner, who says, in a post-pandemic apathetic world, what are you experiencing in organizations' appetite for small experiments? It is a game changer, and specifically, I wonder, what is the tipping point for teams and organizations to see this for themselves?
Well, I take from that question, Tammy, that there is. In fact, I'm hearing a lot of people and a lot of companies talk about the post-pandemic apathy, and there's a lot of anxiety about that. I think people are at risk of throwing up their hands, and I think we need to double down on purpose. We need to double down on community and genuine relationships. So I think I haven't been moving enough here, and the lights just went out. But I guess you can still see
we can still see you.
It's okay. You can still see me. And so I think we need to double down on like people. I think it's sort of like raising children. It's not the right thing to do to sort of say, oh, what do you need and can I get it for you? It's like, let's step back and say, why are we here? Like, why does it matter that this organization exists? Whom do we serve? And why is the world a better place if we serve them well? Right? So it's actually kind of getting on the same side of the table and looking forward together to re-energize people in caring about something larger than themselves. Because I think what we're at risk of is people sort of going, but I need this and I want that. It's a race to the bottom. Right? We have to shift from what I think I want right now to what we need right now in order to serve, right? In order to be excellent, in order to achieve something. And most of us really want to achieve something that we want to be a part of a team that achieves something that's more than we could have done on our own, right? So it's about sort of, getting people re-energized about that vision and about that purpose is like, I think where it starts. And then with that, given that we recognize the necessary uncertainty about the future, we have no choice but to experiment, right? So the appetite for experimentation is deeply tied, not just to experiment, let's experiment for the sake of it, but we must experiment so that we can solve this problem that is between us and being truly great at doing what we've set out to do.
Yeah, it also segues perfectly into the whole idea of systems awareness and the moving from here and now thinking.
Yes, absolutely. So for me, system awareness is overriding the very natural tendency that we all have to look at parts, right? And we're more expertise you have, the more you do this, right? You're sort of looking at the bits you understand. We're very analytical. We take things apart and try to see what's going on, and we don't have as natural a tendency to think about the relationships between parts. And yet the behavior of most systems, whether that's an organization, or a chemical, are determined by the relationships between the elements, not by the elements themselves. And our lens goes to the elements. So if we're leading an organization, we better be thinking very deeply about how the different parts of our policy and our structures and our systems, how they work together to produce the results we're trying to produce, rather than kind of taking them apart. So and then from an individual perspective, it becomes the discipline to say, when we're making a decision or carrying out an action, who and what else will be affected by this downstream. So it's making the mental shift from me now, this kind of short-term thing I'm trying to get done now, to us later.
Now, I don't know which example, if this is right or not. Would you say the nurses and the workaround is a systems issue?
Yes,
Okay.
yes.
Or your son's baseball practice?
Yeah, right. Well, I think the nurses are probably more relevant here.
Not necessarily.
Yeah, well, maybe that's true. So we Anita Tucker and I studied nurses, and nurses in hospitals have a really hard job. And she did the very, very careful observation and documentation and showed that they were, they would encounter several problems a day, at least in any given shift. And by a problem, I mean something that is either blocking their ability to execute a prescribed task, or a lack of a resource that they need, or equipment that they need to do that. And they would, naturally try to solve those problems, but in a sort of in a workaround sense, right? So, let's say if you don't have enough linens to change the linen, you then go get them from another unit, thereby creating a problem for that other unit. But that doesn't matter to you right now, because truly, your patient's needs come first. And then, it all makes sense. It makes sense to them. They solve the problem, they get on with their day. And what Anita just showed was that it was each of these, they ranged, but on average, they were sort of 3 or 4 minutes. So nothing, some were long, some were shorter, but nothing overwhelming, or at least not obviously overwhelming, but they add up, right? These little workarounds add up and contribute to burnout and much more. And what we argued was the very act of all of these workarounds ended up contributing to sort of a deterioration of the quality of the system as a whole. And they were not very motivated, because they hadn't thought about it this way, to get to more the root cause, so that if a problem happens, you have to do what you need to for your patient, and we call it second order problem solving, and do what you can to prevent this kind of problem from happening again. Only about 10% of the problems received anything even close to second order problem solving, where you got full credit for just picking up the phone and making a call, let's say to Linen Supply, to let them know of the problem, full credit. But that sort of that here and nowness led most people to just stay like just trying to solve the problem and less able to see. And we sort of charted these dynamics. We stepped back and look at it and saw that that this very natural human response was in fact contributing to an eroding quality of time.
Yeah, instead of a race to the bottom, sort of a stumble to the
Yeah,
bottom.
yeah, kind of a slow erosion.
Yeah, and the baseball example isn't bad either. But one of the things I've been thinking about recently is, when we care about someone and a leader cares about someone and they don't want to fire someone, that is sort of like here and now thinking, as opposed to what are all of the kind of ramifications of that. But
sometimes clear is kind, right? I mean, I'm not going to sit here and advocate just go around firing everybody, but it is not always the right answer, right? Because in fact, you have a responsibility to your customers, to your patients, to the recipients of this work, and if you have a very strong responsibility to sort of help the people in your, the employees in your care to do a great job, right? To grow into their role and to do the very best possible work. But there will be times where it's just not possible, or it's not a good fit, or their heart's not in it. And then you have to be willing to think about the system, because that is the responsibility that you have.
Yeah, exactly. And that kind of loops right back into how can you do that with kindness and psychological safety, so that people really get that, you're not being willing to be honest, really cannot be in anybody's best interest.
I think that's right. So it's, clear is kind, right? It's not nice, but it is kind, to tell the truth as you see it, but also to always recognize that, that's your partial view, and listen to other view. But you need psychological safety to have a high quality conversation, and you need a high quality conversation to come to the best resolution of a situation.
Yeah, and one person, forgive me, I'm not remembering your name, says management encourages innovation, but the organizational culture is all about low risk. How can you help people make that transition?
Yeah, well, I mean, I guess my mind goes to trying to help. Marie Jersey.
Thank you, Marie.
My mind goes to we need to help management. We need to help leaders create the conditions whereby innovation can thrive. Because, I mean, if the organizational culture is all about low risk, it's taking a giant risk, because basically it's taking the risk of stagnation and or obsolescence over the long rate. Today, we'll be fine today, right? Being in that sort of low risk culture. But tomorrow, metaphorically speaking, we will be at risk. We'll be at risk either of, missing important transitions in the market, or in customer preferences, or in technology, but we will be at risk. So it's not actually a good risk to not take risks, right? Because you're at risk for failing to adapt in a world that keeps frustratingly changing.
I wonder if you have a thought about failures of omission versus failures of commission.
Yeah, I mean, the problem with the reason this is so thorny is that the failures of commission, we see them, right? When you fail, there it is. Failed. I tried something, it failed. When I fail to try, it doesn't really announce itself. If I don't speak up, no one knows that I held back, that nurse at the bedside or that executive in that team meeting. And so the act of holding back or the act of not experimenting are entirely invisible, right? And so the omission, right? The failures of omission don't announce themselves. Others do. Now, that is just absolutely critically important, right? Because as soon as you recognize and grasp the implications of that fundamental asymmetry, is the moment where you realize I have to do something about this.
Mm-hmm. It's sort of like the rule of thumb for conflict is I'm so upset, I'll say something or my head will explode.
Right.
Or a rule of conflict is when you say something and it makes me withdraw, that's the trigger to speak. So you're saying ideally for people to start being aware when they're about to make one of those omission failures, to go into alert and at least realize that's what's happening.
Exactly. I mean, just or even just more that and the bigger picture. Just realize that the failures of omission are every bit as important as the failures of commission. And there's an asymmetry there where one will be visible, the other will be invisible. So you are at risk of erring on the wrong side of the progress and innovation game, right? And I think once you fully recognize that you're at risk, you're just motivated to do something about it.
Amen. So thank you, Amy. So everybody, I'm glad, like me, you are so grateful for Amy's presence in the world and her impact.
You're nice.
So, all right. Bye, everybody. And thank you, Amy.
Soon.